Today's slideshow is on the subjunctive and conjunctions of time. Remember, the goal of language is communication. Understanding grammar rules allows us to communicate more effectively and precisely. Let's talk about terminology. Adverbs, clauses, and adverbial clauses. What are they? An adverb is a word that modifies a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. We're going to focus on adverbs modifying verbs. Juan corre rápidamente. Rapidly is describing how Juan runs. Ana baila frecuentemente. Frequently describes how often Ana dances. A clause is something that could be a simple sentence if it has a subject and a verb, and it expresses a complete thought. An independent clause is a part of a sentence that could stand alone as a simple sentence, but we've decided to join it together with another clause to make either a compound or a complex sentence. A dependent clause is a part of a sentence that cannot stand alone because, while it has both a subject and a verb, it does not express a complete thought. What is an adverbial clause? It is a special kind of dependent clause that tells why, when, how, and where the action in the independent or the dominant clause takes place. Let's look at some examples. Marco trabaja para que su familia viva cómodamente. Marco works so that his family lives comfortably. Marco trabaja cuando su jefe se lo pide. Marco works when his boss tells him to. Marco trabaja como a su jefe le gusta. Marco works how or as his boss likes. Marco trabaja donde su jefe lo manda. Marco works where his boss likes. Now notice only the first sentence, the one containing para que, uses the subjunctive. That's because para que is a conjunction of contingency. With these conjunctions, you must always use the subjunctive in the subordinate clause. The other three sentences, the when, how, and where, tell us about Marco's habitual actions. So hopefully Marco, who always works when, how, and where his boss wants, is going to be getting a raise soon. Here are the conjunctions of time we're studying. Antes de que, which means before, cuando, when, después de que, after, en cuanto, as soon as, hasta que, until, tan pronto como, which means as soon as. Now notice antes de que has a star. That's because it is both a conjunction of time and a conjunction of contingency, which means that it will always be followed by a verb in the subordinate clause. Whether we use the subjunctive or the indicative with conjunctions of time depends on the tense of the main verb, that is the verb in the dominant clause, and, more importantly, the intent of the speaker or the writer. Notice, if our independent clause is in the past and our dependent clause is in the past, the dependent clause is going to be in the indicative. If, on the other hand, our independent clause is in the future, we're going to use the subjunctive in the dependent clause. Let's talk about the present. Here it's going to depend. We're going to be talking about the messy middle. And at this point, it's good to remember the difference between a tense and a mood. A tense is the past, the present, and the future. On the other hand, a mood, the indicative versus the subjunctive, refers to the way we're looking at the material. In the indicative, we're talking about what is real. We're talking about facts. We're talking about things that already happened. In the subjunctive, we're having an emotional reaction to the events, or we're talking about what could happen maybe in the future. We're giving commands. So remember, the mood, whether indicative or subjunctive, is different from a tense. Do not be scared by this messy table. It's going to make more sense. Let's break it down. We have past, present, future. That refers to the tense. And then we have indicative versus subjunctive. I'm going to break it down for you, and then the table is going to make more sense. If the verb in the dominant clause is in a past tense, the indicative is going to be used in the subordinate clause. This makes sense. The action is completed. It is a fact. There's no doubt, no uncertainty. Let's look at this sentence. I bought myself a new car when my salary increased. Both the verbs are going to be in the indicative, and since this is something that happened once, I got a raise, I got a car, we're going to use the preterite. Me compré un carro nuevo cuando mi sueldo aumentó. Now let's look at a verb in the present tense. If the verb in the dominant clause is in the present tense, but it refers to a habitual action, the indicative is used in the subordinate clause. And again, it makes sense. The action has taken place in the past, and it will take place in the future. Think about Marco, our hard worker. There is no doubt or uncertainty. Here's our sentence. I buy a new cell phone when Apple makes a new iPhone. I evidently don't like money. So I'm going to be using the present tense in both blanks. Compró un celular nuevo cuando Apple hace un nuevo iPhone. If the verb in the dominant clause is in the present tense, nevertheless referring to the future, we're going to use the subjunctive in the subordinate clause. We need the subjunctive because the future action may not take place. It is dependent upon a hypothetical future event. Our sentence, I'm buying a new cell phone when T-Mobile has it on sale. Again, I'm using the present tense for my dominant clause, but the subjunctive in the dependent. Compró un celular nuevo cuando T-Mobile lo tenga en oferta. Now notice, compró is the same word as we just had in our earlier sentence. The difference is in Spanish, the simple present means both I buy and I'm buying. Now let's look at another case. If the verb in the dominant clause is in a future tense, the subjunctive is going to be used in the subordinate clause. We need the subjunctive because the future action may not take place. Again, it's dependent upon a hypothetical future event. I will buy a new cell phone when T-Mobile has it on sale. Now, instead of using compró, I'm going to use the future tense. Compraré un celular nuevo cuando T-Mobile lo tenga en oferta. Our last example is if the verb in the dominant clause is a command or the imperative tense, we're going to use the subjunctive in the subordinate clause. Remember, we use the subjunctive for persuasion and when the anticipated action is uncertain. Anna, buy a new cell phone when T-Mobile has it on sale. I'm making my command, but the future event still is uncertain. Ana compra un celular nuevo cuando T-Mobile lo tenga en oferta. I'm going to stop the presentation here. I'm sending you the actual slideshow so that you can look at it more slowly, and there are further examples breaking down the topic using the 5 layers. Past, past, it's going to be in the indicative. Present, referring to habitual actions. Indicative, indicative. Present, referring to future actions, we're going to have indicative subjunctive. Future in the dominant clause, subjunctive in the dependent clause. Command in the dominant clause, you're going to have subjunctive in the dependent. Thanks for listening.